All right, I want you to picture this. You're a kid, you're plopped down on the couch right after school, the TV is humming, and then you hear it. That theme song. You know the one? For so many of us, that sound meant it was time for a trip to Birdwell Island.
Yeah, that voice, that line, it's just pure instant nostalgia, isn't it? It was such a simple, warm way to start a show that was, let's be honest, a huge part of growing up for a ton of us. We all remember the stories, the little lessons, and of course, that giant, lovable, super red dog. But here's the thing. Right after Emily Elizabeth says hi, you'd get this whole string of names, all these organizations flashing on the screen. We heard those names every single day, but did we ever really know what they meant? Well, today, we're going to pull back that curtain. We're going to figure out who was actually footing the bill for Clifford.
So the first and probably the most obvious layer of funding came from big companies, what they call corporate underwriters. Now, these weren't your typical loud, in-your-face toy commercials. Nope. On PBS, it was different. It was just these quick, calm little shout-outs from brands that really wanted to be linked with something positive and educational.
And these sponsors were super smart about it. I mean, this was a brilliant move. They weren't just, slapping their logo on the show and calling it a day. They were aligning their brand with a very specific part of being a kid. So you had Chuck E. Cheese's, which was all about fun and playing. Danimals yogurt, that was about growing strong, right? Physical health. Lipton's whole thing was about using your brain, thinking, solving stuff. And Milton Bradley was all about playing together. See? They were selling an idea, not just a cup of yogurt or a board game.
And you can totally see these different strategies in the actual words they used. Take Lipton noodle soup. They would literally invite you to use your noodle while showing a little puzzle. It's a direct shot at getting you to think. But then you flip over to Chuck E. Cheese's, and what's their line? Where a kid can be a kid. That's not about puzzles. That's all about freedom, pure fun, and just the awesome chaos of being a kid.
Chuck E. Cheese was probably the sponsor we heard the most. And it's interesting because their message had these little tweaks over time, even though it always ended with that famous tagline. One day they might talk about developing bodies and minds. The next, it was about how playing and living together go hand in hand. They were really trying to position themselves as the brand that cared about the whole kid, the complete childhood experience.
Okay, so that's the corporate playbook. But that was just one slice of the pie. The next layer of funding is something we all heard, but I'm willing to bet most of us had no idea what it actually meant. And this part, well, it came from the US government.
Yep, this phrase. I can hear it in my head right now. Funded in part by a ready-to-learn grant. It just rolls off the tongue. It sounds so official, so important, and also kind of confusing, right? Like, what is a ready-to-learn grant?
Well, it turns out this wasn't just some vague bureaucratic phrase. It was a real thing, a specific program from the U.S. Department of Education, and its mission was crystal clear: to fund the creation of really good educational TV shows, exactly like Clifford. It was basically the country investing in its youngest citizens' brains, and they gave out the money through a competitive process to make sure the shows were actually top-notch.
So let's trace the path of that money, right? How did it get from a government office all the way to your TV? It started with the Department of Education, which put up the cash for the grant. Then, this other group, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, their whole job is to support public media. They helped pass that money along. And finally, it landed with your local PBS station, which is what allowed them to air Clifford for everyone, for free.
Okay, but wait. The money trail isn't over yet. We've covered the big companies, we've covered the government, but after all those official thanks, there was one last, super important shout-out. And this one was a little more personal. You know it, that simple, quiet phrase. And by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you, thank you. It was probably the last thing you heard before the theme song kicked in, and honestly, it might just be the most important piece of this whole puzzle.
See, that line wasn't just them being polite. It was a very real, very direct call to action. The truth is, public broadcasting in the U.S. has always depended on donations from the people watching. You know those pledge drives, the tote bags, the coffee mugs? That's what this line is all about. It's the community itself chipping in to make sure shows like this can exist for everybody.
So okay, let's zoom out and put all the pieces together. You've got the corporate money, you've got the government grants, and you've got donations from regular people. You have to wonder, why? Why build this complicated three-part system just to get a cartoon about a giant red dog on the air?
Well, think of it like a three-legged stool. That's the best way to picture the funding for a show like Clifford. One leg is the corporate sponsors.
The second leg is the public funding from the government, and the third leg is you, the viewer. Each one is a crucial, equal partner. And what happens if you kick out one leg of a stool? The whole thing falls over. It's totally unstable.
And that right there is the big idea. That's the whole point. This special model created a kind of protective bubble around the show. Because it didn't just rely on corporate cash, it didn't have to cram in a bunch of ads or worry about pleasing advertisers, and because it didn't just rely on government money, it was protected from politicians trying to influence things. It created this amazing, unique space where the one and only goal was making a great show for kids.
So the next time you're feeling nostalgic for Clifford, just remember the incredibly clever and, deliberate system that made him possible. It really makes you think, doesn't it? In today's world, with giant streaming services and YouTube channels running on algorithms, could a show funded with this delicate balance of corporate, public, and viewer support even exist anymore? It's a really interesting question to chew on.